All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this event. I'm so happy to be your host once again for this. My name, if you don't know who I am, I'm Ian Mendes, and welcome to Conversations at the Royal, presented by TD. We've done this 2 times now here in 2021, and this is a fantastic event. What we're trying to do is give you some tools in your toolbox to help you through some of the rough stretches here during the pandemic. So for you, those of you who don't know who I am, longtime sports reporter here in Ottawa, but I don't want to come at you as a sports reporter today. My job is to come at you as a fellow parent, I get to coach sports. Daughter plays ringette. I get to teach at Algonquin. So I want to come at you today as a father, as a coach, as a teacher, and understand that we're all dealing with some really difficult times with our youth right now in the pandemic. So we're going to try and have some really important conversations here. But the only way we're able to do things like this is with the help and the assistance of corporations like TD. So before we get started, I would just like to play a short video from our title sponsor, TD.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tara Lynn Hughes, Senior Vice President with TD Bank. We're so proud at TD to be the presenting sponsor of Conversations at the Royal. This speaker series is about bringing critical mental health tools, resources. Hello, everyone. My name is Tara Lynn Hughes, Senior Vice President with TD Bank. We're so proud at TD to be the presenting sponsor of Conversations at the Royal. This speaker series is about bringing critical mental health tools, resources, and care to people in need. Never has this been more important. Living through a pandemic has put challenges in front of Canadians that we've never experienced. And every day at TD, I can see it's testing the mental health and emotional well-being of our employees, our customers, and our communities. That's why conversations around wellness and mental health must be a priority. As always, the Royal Ottawa Foundation is standing tall, and I want to thank them for organizing this important series of virtual monthly events. I believe the Royal and TD share common goals, and that's to advance better health and contribute to open, inclusive, respectful, and dignified conversations that promote recovery and break down stigma. Today and every day, we'll continue to stand together, support each other, and be resilient as we move forward in 2021. On behalf of all of us at TD, thank you for your support and for participating in these very meaningful conversations. Take care, everyone, and be well.
Thank you again to TD for sponsoring this, because without their support, we would not be able to make this a free event for you to drop in during your lunch break, if that's what you're doing on this Thursday. So I want to tell you that, yes, in fact, we are legitimately live. It is 12:03, almost 12:04 here on this Thursday. And we want to stress that because part of this is going to be an interactive session today. We want you to be able to submit questions to Dr. Gail Beck, who's going to join me coming up shortly. She's a youth psychiatrist at the Royal, and we are going to be leaning on Dr. Beck's expertise here in the realm of youth mental health. So if you have questions for Dr. Beck, you're going to see a little chat box there on the right-hand side of your screen. Go ahead and submit some questions, and I'm going to moderate a conversation with Dr. Beck later in this hour. But we are going to also lead this off with another video. Stephanie Richardson is going to be joining me shortly. And if you're not familiar with the DIFD movement, I want to play a video here. The DIFD movement is a grassroots movement involved with youth mental health, and the Richardson family has been so brave in sharing their story, and we want to share it with you right now.
Each year, Canada loses 200 youth to suicide.
I lost my little sister to suicide, and it's been very difficult, and I wish that she would have reached out for someone.
1 in 5 children and youth has an identifiable mental illness.
At a very tragic time in November, we we made the decision to speak publicly about suicide because we wanted to make a difference in other people's lives.
Inspired by the Richardsons, each year Canada loses 200 youth to suicide.
I lost my little sister to suicide, and it's been very difficult, and I wish that she would have reached out for someone.
1 in 5 children and youth has an identifiable mental illness.
At a very tragic time in November, we made the decision to speak publicly about suicide because we wanted to make a difference in other people's lives.
Inspired by the Richardsons' courage in speaking openly about suicide, Daron's friends and family launched a grassroots movement with the mission of creating awareness, inspiring conversations, and transforming youth mental health. The symbol of that movement, a purple heart.
DIFD started a conversation about youth mental health larger than the Richardsons could have ever imagined. With so much generous support, DIFD has been able to bring the issue of youth mental health to the community. DIFD provides mental health education to youth through an educational program called Is It Just Me?
Is It Just Me has educated more than 4,000 students about mental health. Let's keep the conversation going. Raise awareness and start conversations about mental health.
Don't feel comfortable talking? Write it down or wear some DIFD swag and let DIFD start the conversation for you.
What started as Do It For Daron has now become each and every one of our youth.
Whether or not, oh, there we go. So we're back up. And I told you we were live here, that sometimes there's some technical glitches. So we ask you to just be a little bit patient with us as we work out a little bit of the bugs here. But I promise you, we're going to be engaged and informative here in the 30 minutes ahead. That DIFD video was very powerful, and I'm very pleased to be joined now by Stephanie Richardson. And anytime I'm doing anything involved with DIFD, Stephanie, I make sure I wear purple. I do that every time I'm with you for a conversation because I know purple is the color. And I'm going to start by asking you this question because I mentioned, Stephanie, I'm a coach in Ringette. I'm a teacher at Algonquin. I'm a father. So I'm talking to a lot of parents and kids, and I'm hearing a lot of stories of anxiety and stress that maybe weren't there before. What are you hearing from your circle of friends who have kids that are young and maybe struggling right now?
Yeah, I hear the same thing, whether it be angst over schoolwork, angst over lack of interaction with their peers. The parents are stressed working from home, trying to navigate that. Yes, I'm hearing the same thing. And our teachers are maxed. I have teacher friends that said this is some of the hardest things that they've had to overcome. But for our older teachers, it's also teaching online. Our daughter teaches high school, and she said that part is easier for her, and she sees that, right? They're used to working online through college. Everything was electronic. But for some of our older teachers our age, I struggle with the technology part. So now that they've been expected to move their lessons to virtual learning, the teachers are maxed, but they're also worried about the kids, right? They don't get to see them face to face and ask how they're doing and do those daily check-ins.
You know, Stephanie, after watching that video, I think the word that always comes to mind for me when watching that and watching you and Luke is powerful, that you were able to take a story of of any family's worst nightmare, deepest tragedy, and turn it into something so powerful and remarkable. As we approach 10 years here and you watch a video like that, can you even put into words what the DIFD movement has become here in Ottawa?
No, but I will say it certainly wasn't an individual effort, right? That was definitely a group effort, community, everybody kind of coming together. And where some skills were lacking, other people stepped up. We are very blessed with a city of ours with great physicians like Dr. Beck, who stepped forward right away and gave it shape and substance with clinically sound advice. And we need that. And I see the same thing with the pandemic. It's not a silo. People are not going to do this alone. And when they struggle, they need a community of people. And it's the same as if somebody is unwell in your house, it's like cancer. They're not doing it alone. Everybody feels it. Everybody has angst. So I think it's that bonding together that we were able to do in a city such as ours that will bring us through the pandemic healthy if we can continue to tap into each other and be honest and say.
Yeah, and I think, Stephanie, at the core and the heart of the DIFD movement is communication. And, I think what you and Luke have tried to do is educate parents like myself and other parents that, look, we've all talked to our kids about, you talk to your kids about drugs, you talk to your kids about sex, you talk to your kids about alcohol, you talk to them about, but we don't, or at least we didn't in the past, talk to them about mental health and things of that nature. And I want to really ask you about the importance of passing that message along, that having those conversations with our youth about depression and anxiety, it's not going to push them closer or more down that path. It's going to help them and make them understand that we, in fact, are there to support them.
Yeah, and I think that's where, again, with Dr. Beck and all our great clinicians and doctors, they've really assured us, right, that is accurate. And CHEO has done a great research on that, showing that it creates help-seeking behavior for pre-existing problems. And the communication is crucial, even amongst us as adults right now. We have to be healthy to provide healthy skills and healthy dialogue to our kids. And all of this is so important for that reason. It helps us become more comfortable with the language, asking the right questions. Stats have been showing that when kids were asked on a scale of like 1 to 10 what their stress level was, if they were ranking at a 9, when you were asking parents, they would have thought that the children were at a 5 or a 6. We think we know, and we really are all doing our best, but it's to continue to actually ask the questions.
And how many parents would you say, Stephanie, maybe in the last 8 or 9 years have come up to you and or Luke and have opened up to you about their child's mental health struggles or their issues, and feeling like, you have created something that has allowed conversations between parents and kids to take place?
Yes, it's very humbling in that sense that they recredit us. I think it's such a testimony to them that they saw it, they recognized it, they created dialogue, and then they became advocate for their kids to get them healthier, better. And that's really hard to do. And I think sometimes as parents, we forget to say, you know what, we're doing okay and we're doing our best, but it is really, really hard. And kudos to the parents that were able to recognize that and get their kids the right resources.
And I know that, you and I were talking about this yesterday. We're so thankful to have Dr. Beck be able to join us here momentarily to talk about this from a real, sort of clinical aspect, because, we come at it from an ordinary, everyday parents kind of way, where we don't have that type of background. And I just, the final question I have for you before I ask you one more way about people can help out with DIFD would be, when you go back and you think about conversations you wish you had, how do you, as a parent, I guess, reconcile? It's such a difficult thing to look back and think what you and Luke went through and your family went through. I think a lot of people want to know, like, how do you get through every day, Stephanie?
Well, I'm in therapy at the Royal, which is very helpful. But it's interesting that I think we were so well supported. That really helped. I will always blame myself as a mother. That is what therapy is for, is to help me with that. But what I can tell you is that as I became healthier and people were able to share that they felt blame and responsibility as well. And Daron's homeroom teacher, I still hear from her once or twice a year. She's a fabulous teacher. She really cared. She felt she missed something. Daron's primary care physician felt that he missed something. Luke felt he missed something. Morgan felt she missed something. Grandparents felt they missed something. The hockey coaches felt they missed something. That collateral damage is just overwhelming. And I think it made each and every person that we know wanted to make a difference. And that's why when I say it really is a group effort, I feel very strongly that it was top to bottom, from the kids to the teachers to the clinicians to the coaches. We all cared, and we all wanted to say no more. It has to stop, and we have to do better. And I do feel a big responsibility that as adults, we have to do better. We have to do better for ourselves, and it'll make us better parents, better colleagues, better spouses. There's a ripple effect here. And again, we got to keep tapping into our great clinicians and people like you to break down the stigma and keep these conversations going.
And I think, Stephanie, that was so well said, because we're doing this. We want to hammer this home to people that are tuning in today. You're not raising your kids alone. It's not just you and your spouse or your partner. You've got a community here, and it's all of us who are involved in your kid's life that we're here to help you out. We got to get back to the way it used to be when people used to raise kids in a community, and some of that is lost. And I think that's what we have to do a better job. Before I let you go, Stephanie, and I know you and I are very excited to hear from Dr. Beck with her presentation. I know that this week you were really touched by some of the videos that were submitted in that DIFD contest. I just want to give you a moment to talk about some of the powerful videos that you saw submitted to the Royal this week.
Yeah, it's really neat. I do not know who the winner is, but I was hoping that maybe we could highlight all the videos. We saw such a wide variety of people from all different backgrounds, girls, boys. It was such a neat combination, and what their struggle was, that it's not one thing. They all touched on something very different and very unique to who they are. And if it's unique to them, there's thousands of kids out there that will resonate with. So I would love to see us highlight each and every video.
Excellent. Yeah, and we look forward to kind of seeing the winner. Stephanie, as always, thank you so much for taking a few minutes to share your family story. I say this every time I speak to either you or Luke. Nobody has done more to push forward conversations and healthy lifestyle for youth on the mental health realm than the Richardson family. So thank you so much again for using this platform and taking a few minutes to speak to us here this afternoon.
Thank you.
There's Stephanie Richardson, and as I mentioned, folks, the Richardson family has done so much when it comes to youth mental health. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to have Dr. Gail Beck, and Dr. Beck is the Clinical Director of Youth Psychiatry at the Royal, and this is really important. I want you to start thinking about questions you want to ask about your own personal situation, and I want to make this very clear. We won't use any names. Just fire any questions about your child's, concerns that you have, and I will address them over to Dr. Beck when Dr. Beck has done her session here. Dr. Beck is somebody who you might have actually seen. I love this piece that Dr. Beck wrote in the Ottawa Citizen about 2 weeks ago about the importance for March break for children. And I thought it was so well written. It was so well voiced. It was, you hit that one right on the head, the issues that our children are facing. So Dr. Beck, without further ado, I know you have a very informative presentation on deck. Get your questions into the chat box right now, and I'll come back on the other side to moderate those questions. But Dr. Beck, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ian. And thank you very much also. Let me echo my thanks to Stephanie Richardson. She and Luke have really done a terrific job highlighting some of the concerns that all of us who work in youth mental health really have. And you can see that she's very unassuming about the role that she and her family have played. But from talking to many families who've lost a child, I can't emphasize enough how much courage it takes to talk through your own pain for really no other reason than to help other families and other youth. So I do want to thank her for that. I think the other thing, Ian, about halfway through that presentation, when you and Stephanie were speaking, I thought, oh my God, every point that I wanted to mention in this presentation, they're making. So I think the best thing I can do is to just highlight a couple of the messages that you and Stephanie already made. And so these are 3 hints that I have for every family who's having a hard time through the pandemic, parents and youth. And the first hint that I have to every parent out there is remember in the middle of all this to look after yourself. Especially moms, I think everybody's running around. It's harder to get the groceries. It's harder to, to take care of things that you used to be able to just rush out, drive out and do. So in the end, you've got to set up your children on their various appointments and school online. And we've had technical glitches today. We all of these presentations always do. And if you have more than one child or even one child at home, you're dealing with that. You're dealing with a lot. So be sure that you look after yourself. It's very important. The second message that I have is that to remember to have fun as a family and to remember what your family is about. Often when I'm seeing a family, if they're struggling with that at the moment, one of the things that I like to do, and I think it's a good idea for families, is I ask them to bring in their favorite picture of their family together. And when they have that picture in their hands and they look at it, I ask them to remember the day that picture was taken, to remember maybe their mom when she wore that dress, or their dad when he wore that shirt again, even though you told them it was lousy. And even to look at a child when they were a certain age and looking at things from the past, looking at those pictures, remembering that we will go back to a life that's different and better, and we can keep the life that we have right now. We can still have fun. We can still play board games. We can go out for walks. We can do many things to make sure that we have fun, because having fun is part of looking after ourselves and each other. The final thing, and I think both Stephanie and Ian made this message very eloquently, and that is that we need to talk. We need to talk about what's happening. We need to talk about our anxiety. We need to talk about our depression. And there's often a worry that if you talk about suicide, if you talk about anxiety, if you talk about depression, it will bring it out somehow. It will cause it to emerge. The truth of the matter is that thinking about suicide, trying to take your own life, those are symptoms of serious psychiatric illnesses. And we can look after those illnesses. And there are many things that we can do. And the longer time goes on, the more research we have, the more we learn about what we can do. We're not helpless about these illnesses. The other thing I really want people to understand from that is, just as Stephanie highlighted, parents, moms, dads, and siblings, everybody blames themselves when a tragic event like suicide happens. But it's nobody's fault. It's an illness. People wouldn't blame themselves for cancer. They wouldn't blame themselves for diabetes. Mental health is completely different. In a way, we think maybe there's something that we could have done. The truth of the matter is, most parents, really, the vast majority, 99.99%, they've all done everything they could to do a good job of being a mom or a dad. And the job that we have all together is to make sure our community can really look after mental illness as well as possible. So for all of you who are listening, I know you're doing your best. Please make sure you look after yourselves, and please make sure you have fun together as a family. And I don't think that that's 10 minutes, but I wanted to leave as much time as possible for questions, Ian.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Beck, because your message there was so important about don't blame yourself as a parent. Like you said, you wouldn't blame yourself if your child was ill in another more kind of, in a different way medically. So don't take that burden onto yourself. But it's tough because I think as parents, we feel this innate responsibility to protect our children at all costs. And there's a feeling of being helpless. And I'm so glad, Dr. Beck, that you have decided to leave even more time for questions. And I want to make this crystal clear to people that you have the next, half hour or so. We have one of the best youth psychiatrists in the city at our disposal. And please, I love seeing this chat box fill up because we're all dealing with some issues here in and around the pandemic. So just use that chat feature. I will get the questions over to Dr. Beck. One of the questions, Dr. Beck, that we're starting to get in, and this is, I think, a common problem, would be anxiety with a child during the pandemic rising to the point where the child becomes so paralyzed that they don't either want to go to school, or maybe if they're doing an activity, they're paralyzed with fear. As a parent, or anxiety. As a parent, what do we do in those situations when a child is having a panic attack that we can help them through that particular moment?
So very often, I'm glad you asked this question, because this is really one of those very critical times. And it's a hard time because often panic attacks, they seem never to come when you've got a lot of time. They often come when nobody has any time. And the first thing you have to do is recognize that a panic attack is something that gets better with time. And so it's almost as if you have to say, we're going to stop and we're going to focus right now. So if you can, sit down with your child, and this is important, to sit down with your child, to get them to sit down and say, we're just going to take a minute. We're going to take a minute and just stop and think. Now, some children, when they have a panic attack, can't think. Some children can't talk. And so you just do your best to wait and see. And the other thing is, if you find they're breathing very hard, hyperventilating, and to the point where you think that they're going to faint, remember the things that you do for somebody who's fainting. So you can have them breathe into a paper bag. You can count with them to slow their breath down. So 1, count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, and have them slow the pace of their breaths down so that they don't feel faint and even worse. For a child who doesn't talk, you can say calming things to them. Most parents have an idea of what kinds of things will calm a child. If a child is very little, for a couple of my children when they were little, it was often helpful, and it really helped control their breath, to have them sing or to do exercises like that. And you can sing to them their favorite song. One of my children loved the song Away in a Manger, and he sang it all year long at bedtime. And so we would have known what to sing to him. I think that other parents know, I mean, all those families that have watched Mary Poppins or Frozen over and over, there are things that you can think about that are always fun that you can help people remember. If your child isn't quiet when they're having a panic attack, but if they're talkative, just let them talk. And most of us are having more thought, more dread these days. So that, if your grandmother is living alone, you might wonder, is she okay? If your grandmother or grandfather is living in a long-term care facility, you might be even more worried. And I think that all that we can do is just point out we're all doing the best that we can, and to do whatever is reassuring in the moment. And in a few more minutes, in 5 minutes, in 10 minutes, and later you start talking about where that panic attack came from, and you think about what you can do to help whatever the situation was that made someone worried.
And I think it's important too, Dr. Beck, that we understand as parents, I feel like we're the first generation of parents to navigate this. Like if you went back to my parents and if you raised kids in the 80s or the 90s, for the most part, it was, hey, suck it up and get back out there. Like I feel like we're the first generation that's trying to sort of foster these types of conversations. And we're all new at this. And I think as parents, we need to understand, like, we are maybe the first generation to sort of communicate with our parents this way, or with our children this way. And I think we need to be a little bit more patient with ourselves and, not expect perfection when we connect with them. And I have a question here that is kind of similar along those lines. And I think teachers are going through this too. Here's a question. I am a high school teacher. How can I best support the mental health of my students right now?
So first of all, I actually work in a high school with a program that we have that operates in an Ottawa high school. And so even though it's not part of our program, we get to hear the announcements. I work with 4 amazing high school teachers, and I am truly amazed. I know that on top of all of their family stresses, they're also dealing with the stresses of their classroom. I wanted to be a teacher when I was younger. It was actually a high school biology teacher who convinced me that I should think about being a doctor. It always makes me feel emotional about the impact she had on my life. And I think it's important for high school teachers to remember that just their presence is comforting and inspiring to many students. The thing that gets me the most about high school students and high school teachers is really, they seem a lot more cheerful than I think I am many days. Like, I listen to announcements. The announcements in the high school where I am are invariably cheerful. Whenever I say hello to people, they've got a nice, friendly hello back. And so I guess for the teacher who's worried about what they could do, the fact that so many teachers are doing that and managing that in the face of everything extra they're facing is amazing. And I'm really grateful to you because I see the students that high school teachers teach, and I know what a good job you're doing. So be reassured about that. In terms of supporting their mental health, again, the best thing you can do is to make sure that you yourself are in a good space, that you yourself are taking the time you need to stay supported and to look after your own health and mental health. I think then the next thing really is, to keep listening and to keep encouraging people to talk. Many people talk to their teachers in a way that they don't sometimes at home, because I still find that youth are curious and they're looking for information. And their main source of information about certain kinds of factual things are actually their teachers. And so I think that, remember, it's not an embarrassment to have to say, I don't know the answer to that, but let me find out. I can't imagine I'm telling anybody, any teacher out there, anything they don't already do. But I think that your calming presence, looking after yourself, and just, again, going back to that original message that we know you're doing your best, and just have confidence in what you've always done well, because I think most people can see that you are. Maybe, if you don't mind, Ian, the other thing that I'll remind, I don't know if people remember back this far, we're not seeing them as much last year, but one of the things that I found was very refreshing in April was that many parents were posting these memes on Facebook and on Twitter. And these were the memes, that very often people thought, oh, teaching is an easy job. It's an easy job. And there were these memes that came out that said things like, well, now that my kids have been home for a month, I realize it wasn't the teacher. Right? Those, they were a bit funny and they were a bit tongue-in-cheek, but they were very true. And I think those are some things for teachers to remember, and then to remember to talk.
Again, I want to remind everybody, if you're listening, watching us live here on this Thursday afternoon, get your questions into the chat box. We've got Dr. Gail Beck from the Royal here, willing to answer any questions that you might have about youth mental health. And I like this question, Dr. Beck. I know it's a broad question, but I think it's an important question. This comes into the chat box. How do we know when it's time to seek professional help for our youth?
So I have a very good experience with a family doctor. I've always had a good family doctor. My children have always had a good family doctor. And I think that if a parent's ever wondering, family doctors are in their offices these days. They're available. If you're wondering if what your child is going through moves beyond what's normal, you should think about calling your family doctor and having a chat. If your child has a pediatrician, then that's the other person you can seek some advice from. My children, from the time they were born and even still now, have the same family doctor, and they're adults. And so he knew them. When he left his practice, he transferred to someone else that they now know. And I think family doctors want to help people during the pandemic. And family doctors probably do 60 to 70% of their days. That's often the evidence for many family doctors that of their days is mental health. So if you're worried about that yourself, don't take that worry on. See what your family doctor or pediatrician has to say about that.
And another question that's come up in a couple of different forms, so I'll try and get the essence of the question down, which is basically, what do you do during the pandemic, Dr. Beck, are virtual counseling sessions for teens or young adults, I guess, of kids of any age, are those beneficial, or is it better to try and get some sort of face-to-face, human-to-human contact in this regard?
So this is certainly a question that we had to ponder at the Royal, because and Chio pondered it as well, and I think most mental health services thought about this a lot last year in March. And I want to give a shout out to the youth team at the Royal in our outpatient program and in one of our day programs, the youth partial hospitalization program. All of our partners at CHIO and even CHIO's emergency psychiatry services, they pivoted immediately to virtual care. And so the first question, of course, that came to mind is this effective? And so we're monitoring this, and mental health services around the world are monitoring this. Now, youth are a special population in this regard. Stephanie spoke to this a bit when she talked about people's familiarity with virtual, with online chats and virtual care. And we have found actually that many youth for individual care are quite happy with being able to do this, some of these things online. We're not sure that groups are as effective, but we do know that many of our face-to-face interactions on Zoom have had a lot of advantages for them for a number of youth. We're still monitoring the overall efficacy because we have to do that. But the other thing that we know that we're certain of is that moving forward from the pandemic, in the youth program at any rate, we will probably have a certain number of youth who will prefer to remain with virtual appointments rather than taking a full half day off school to drive into the Royal, to come up and see us, to go back and then miss a whole half day of school, have their mom or dad miss a half day of work, pay parking, a lot of things. So there may be some advantages, and there is a preference. So that's certainly one element, but we do still bring, for urgent circumstances or those few circumstances where we really need to do an examination of vital signs or a face-to-face exam, we are still bringing youth in. We do have an inpatient unit that's open. It was closed for a period, but it's reopened. And our school program, the one I work in, is also face-to-face. So we've got a little bit of a comparator, but that's what we know so far about this, and mental health services around the world will be continuing to examine this.
Next question comes in, and again, we have Dr. Gail Beck with us. So please, if you have any questions that you would like the answers to, we've got Dr. Beck with us for another 20 minutes or so here on this Thursday. This question comes in, and it says as follows. I'll read it as follows. What coping strategies, Dr. Beck, would you say are normal when your child has started to retreat so much? We have an 8-year-old who has become a shell of her former vibrant self during this challenging time. She's started to retreat to her room constantly as a coping mechanism. And she's reading all the time. She hides away from the rest of the family in our busy home. Would you say that this is a healthy coping mechanism or something that we should be worried about?
So the first thing that I think I'll say is that I have told almost every mother that I've ever seen, as a mother of 5 myself, I don't think I'll ever know your child as well as I do. And so if you're worried about what's happening with your child, first of all, work hard to talk to them. Think about things that the two of you used to do together that were always fun. And think, is there any way, if it was something that seems impossible to do now, then maybe that will be difficult, but think of the best way to replicate it. And do whatever you can to make a time when you can actually speak with that child, not by sort of sitting in the room and saying, I've got to ask you these questions, but really by just beginning to spend time with them doing something that will remind them of what you used to do that was always fun. I think that If you can't achieve that at all, it may be time to talk with your family doctor. The other thing that I remind people of, and I don't think people realize this, and I'm not sure I realized this necessarily, but when one of my sons was about 4 years old, we had a difficult circumstance going on, and he started to retreat into himself. He's a quiet little human being. He is reserved, but at one point he just said to me, Mom, I can't take it any longer. Now, he was the youngest of 5 children, and there were 7 of us in the house. He said, Mom, I can't take it anymore. I have 6 people that I need to look after, and that's not even counting Nana. And all of a sudden it dawned on me, as much as a parent thinks it's their job to look after the children, my son thought he had a job too, to look after us. And he didn't think he was managing it. So remember, some of the people your children may be worried about, or one of the things they may be worried about, is you. And one of the last things they may want to do is give you any more worry. And I think that you would be surprised at how young that starts. And we certainly see it more and more, even though an older child may not want to say it, because it doesn't seem like quite the right thing. I think most children feel they have a responsibility in their family, regardless of what we believe the hierarchies are. I think that that's certainly one thing. The other thing is, remember, at any point in time, if you're worried about what you're seeing, then find a way to speak about it to a professional if your child is really struggling to speak with you at all. Because, I think reading is a good coping strategy. I think the other thing that we are really beginning to wonder about, many parents, and I think about it a lot myself, is how much screen time is too much screen time. Now, I'm a lucky psychiatrist. Very little of my time is spent on a screen. But every once in a while, when I've got a follow-up day, and I'm basically sitting like this at a desk, looking into a screen, I'll get up at noon and realize that's the first time I've stood for 4 hours. And that can't be good for you, because the thing is, you can move quickly from one Zoom appointment to another. And that's not easy. So I think that it's important for us to really look at screen time and what impact does that have on us, because there is evidence that people can become addicted to their screens. Say all of us who may be spending many hours on one.
But I think here's the interesting conundrum, I think, with screen time right now. And probably this would be more for teens, but in the absence, Dr. Beck, of face-to-face contact with their friends playing soccer or hockey, or I got to give a plug to Ringette because it's the best sport. In the absence of that, that's the only way that they can connect with their peers. So how do we manage that as parents, where maybe they're on their screen for 3 hours in a row, but 90 minutes is FaceTiming or chatting with their friends? That's their only way to communicate with their peers right now.
So this is going to show how old I am. But, on the one hand, I worry about the screen time, and you read a lot of data about the damages of the rays emitted by screens and all of this. And one of the things every once in a while my mind will go back to is how, when I was about 14, one of the things that I liked to do on Saturday was that I would phone my friend, and holding a telephone receiver, because there were not speakerphones in those days, under my ear like this, and I could spend hours on the telephone doing a geography assignment with a friend. And you would not believe what people thought a telephone could do to you. And so that's when I worry about screen time too much, I go back to whether or not I think it had an impact on me to spend 3 hours on the phone with a friend who lived a large distance from me, and there were no buses to get to them. And maybe what we're going to learn in the end is that it's a balance. And between the balance of too much screen time being bad for you, where do you start to balance that you need to have contact with the people who help you stay sane, if you like? I hope that's helpful at some level.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, I think we all, if you grew up even in the 80s and 90s, that's all we had was the phones. So yeah, that I can relate to that 100%. I got a note in here too. And by the way, first of all, this question leads off with I love that it's a purple heart. And thank you, Stephanie, for sharing your story. You were so inspiring. So I hope you, Stephanie, I know you're still in the kind of the background there, but I hope you can see that message in the purple heart. I know that means a lot. Here's the question. I think this is a pretty normal question right now, Dr. Beck. My son is exhausted right now, going to school, doing schoolwork, which then leads to some emotional breakdowns. Are there any suggestions to help him manage this?
So I think, Ian, you mentioned that I'd written an op-ed about not canceling March break. And I really I felt then, and I still am very worried about the fact that I think everyone involved in school, the kids in school, all those people who keep kids in school, their parents, maybe sometimes extended family members, their teachers, custodians, the assistants at the school, the educational assistants, the people who drive them to school. They have been going flat out. And March break has always been a kind of a halfway point between the Christmas break and June. The other thing I don't know whether people have noticed or not is that there are fewer PD days this year. Now, obviously, we have to stay safe from this, from COVID-19. And especially we have to think about the new variants. But when I wrote that op-ed, a part of my plea was that the government should not, in trying to keep us safe from COVID-19, throw our mental health out. We have to remember that mental health is another important facet of health. And I think that we have had big outbreaks from schools. If you were to go into any school in this city, or frankly, anywhere around the province or the country, these look like very safe places. They are taking huge precautions. I have watched teachers make sure that youth answer a series of questions before they go into school in the morning. And everybody in my experience is doing that pretty diligently. I'm not saying it's 100%, but I am saying that most people are doing it. And I think people are getting tired. And so I think that we're going to have to balance as we move forward with that level of fatigue, how to balance that level of fatigue with the fact that this is another week when we're going to be in school. Now, on a positive side, so many teachers and students have said to me, well, at least our break is coming in April. So I think that that's an indication of how fast that system that looks after students and students themselves is able to pivot. So I hope that works, but I am worried about it.
Again, we got about 10 more minutes to go here with Dr. Beck. We have so many questions. Keep them coming into that chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll try to get to as many as possible. This one comes in, Dr. Beck. First of all, thank you so much for the wisdom you've imparted on us today. Here's our situation. My wife and I have 3 kids. The oldest is a boy, then we have 2 younger daughters. I feel like in our family, I am the fun parent, whereas my wife does a lot of the heavy lifting. While this might sound good to some people, I do feel like my son, shares intimate fears and worries only with his mom and not with me. How do I go about having him and his younger sisters open up to me? I have a great relationship with my son, but we bond about sports and other things. I'd love to achieve a happy middle ground. Do you have any ideas for me?
Well, so first of all, I want to thank that parent for recognizing that I have an expertise. And the first thing I would say is that you're suggesting that for something you would like to do more effectively, there is already an expert in your home, and that's your partner. And so I think that, your experience is maybe not different from a lot of families. I think that there are many dads who wish that that they had more of the serious conversations. And I think that there are many moms who wish that they could be perceived as the fun parent a bit more often. I think that that's a common pattern. And I think that a way to try to achieve that is by finding out from your partner when they're most likely to have those serious conversations, and see if they have any hints in that regard. I know that my experience as a mom was that I didn't do it on purpose. It just happened that at one point I was the best person to pick up a couple of people from school. And granted, the situation may be different now with virtual school for some people, but I found that when I picked up someone at school, they would get themselves into the car and they just dump out, as we drove home, in 15 minutes, all of the stuff that was difficult about their day. And if my husband had asked me, when can you have a serious conversation? I would have said, pick them up, because that's when they talk to me. It just comes out. And I know perfectly well that if that child had taken the bus home, by the time they would have gotten home, and I had asked them, how was your day? They'd have said, fine. If I had said, did anything happen? They would have said no, because they've processed. So in a way, and I know many parents say that, the best time to process is when you're driving. And I think the main reason for that is that when you've got your eyes on the road, what you can't do is you cannot turn and stare at someone in that parent's expression that's saying, oh my God, I can't believe you're saying that. That would be my thought about that. That doesn't come from any great expertise as a parent as a psychiatrist. I must say, there are days when I think that everything I learned about being a psychiatrist, I learned from my kids.
That's that's really well said. And I think that helps a lot of us to know that, yes, you obviously have the background as a doctor, as a psychiatrist, but there's so many things that you learned in just your regular day-to-day dealings as a parent that you've used the strategies. And I think that really helps people like us, because then we don't feel like we need to go to school for 8 years to be able to manage our kids. A couple more questions here before we get to the top of the hour. Actually, I think this is a great question here. It's very hard to find available psychiatrists for adults. How would somebody even go about trying to find a child psychiatrist here in Canada?
So I will just say that at this moment in this country, not just psychiatrists, but also psychologists and all mental health workers, we have a shortage of people in these positions. As you mentioned, it takes a long time to train a medical doctor and then a psychiatrist. It takes a long time to get your PhD in psychology. It takes a long time to get your master's in social work, which is the preparedness of the social workers in our hospital who work in mental health, as well as nursing and all of those folks. So there is a shortage, and I'm not saying it's easy. But we'll go back to the fact that there are many mental health services that are offered in the community, a lot of these are very preventative. So that if we catch the beginnings of anxiety, and right now in this pandemic, most of us have very reasonable anxiety. There's so much going on that's new and different. There's so much about this pandemic that we don't know. There's so much about this impact of the impact of this pandemic that we're, using our best guesses on and hoping we're doing what we need to do. But remember that a family doctor can provide a wealth of information, and there are other agencies in the community, family services, support groups that can offer some support to start with, and who can discern whether or not more expert help is needed. The other thing is that there are actually people in the community who have expertise in mental health for dealing with difficulties as they emerge. And many family doctors themselves have taken extra training to be able to do that. So I think that, many people are frustrated. They'll call looking to see a psychiatrist. If you were looking for therapy in my hospital, that therapy would be provided by people much better trained in the psychotherapies than me. They would tend to be social workers and some nursing staff and some psychologists. And so not to disregard the kind of input they can provide in mental health.
We'll take a couple more questions here. Look, I know a lot of what we've talked about today, Dr. Beck, is probably skewed towards a little bit of an older demographic with teens and tweens and young adults. We did have a couple of questions in here about younger kids, and I'll just pick one of them here. First of all, thank you so much for doing this session. How would you go about explaining anxiety to young children? I'm talking ages 5 and 3. I have a few books as we try and attempt to bring up feelings. Do you have any suggestions on how to broach the topic of anxiety with young children 5 and 3?
I will say that a good reference that I recommend is by, I think her name is Katerina Manassis, Manassis, and she wrote a book about I think it was called something like Managing Your Anxious Child. I think the other thing is that I know that if you Google books for young children on anxiety, you can find those. The other thing may be a wording kind of issue. While many children may not understand the word anxiety, most of them understand the word worry. And if I'm looking into a history of anxiety, one of the first questions that I will ask is a young person. I'll ask them if they remember if they were a worrier when they were young. And we know that normal worry can often progress or is often the first sign of somebody being anxious. The other thing that I think is that I think anxiety is a really hard emotion and disorder, in the sense that it can be so adaptive. The world loves anxious people. They love the people who strive to do their best, who worry if they feel they're not doing their best, who tend to be a bit perfectionistic, who are usually concerned, who are compassionate. Those are the people the world loves. And so it's hard when you realize you're too much of a worrier to go backwards, because people may see that at first as uncaring. And so I think and the other thing is that very often we find that anxious children have anxious parents. And so if you think that's the case in your circumstance, then it would be, I think, a good idea to go back to those original thoughts that Ian and Stephanie expressed and that I highlighted, which is to look after yourself and to learn a little bit about meditation. Now, one of the best ways that people meditate actually is with sports. So if you're focused on drills in sports, it's very hard to focus on other things. And so from that perspective, I think that think about those kinds of activities. Think about yoga. Think about the things that calm you down invariably. And but that reference I gave you, and to look up these other things on Google, that's a very good way to approach that difficulty.
Well, Dr. Beck, I think we'll have to leave it there as we hit 1 o'clock Eastern time on the button. I really appreciate your time. I guess as we say goodbye here on this Thursday, I would ask, sorry, if we can bring Dr. Beck back for one last second. I just have to ask Dr. Beck one last question in terms of the best resources right now. If you're a parent that's worried or struggling, kind of, I guess the last question would be, what's the best resource or place for a parent who is worried about their child's anxiety right now?
Family doctor. The other thing is that the public health websites, the website for the Canadian government, for the City of Ottawa, for the province, all have tips on how to deal with anxiety.
There we go. Well said. Thank you again, Dr. Beck, for joining us. Thank you again to TD for being a presenting sponsor for this event, because, again, we could not have done this without them. So we just want you to remember that we're going to be back again for another conversation at the Royal on March the 3rd. That just happens to coincide with International Women's Week. And it's all going to be about discussing women's mental health in celebration of International Women's Week. So watch for your invitation in your email box. We'll be sending that over to you. Thank you again for all of your participation and your engagement in this event today. Thank you to Stephanie Richardson and Dr. Gail Beck for joining me. This was a very useful conversation. We hope it helped you on the other side of the screen. Until the next time, stay safe and have a great day.